All right. Hi, guys.
Good. Hey, Melina, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
How you doing?
We're good. Well, it is 12 o'clock on the dot Eastern time, so we're gonna get started. So welcome everyone. We've got some great numbers so far. Welcome to Uncomfortable Questions, where we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so addressing the tough questions leaders get about race in our organizations and in our communities. They're the questions that people are often too afraid to ask out loud or don't know where exactly to ask them, but we think they're really, really critical to discuss, and that's exactly why we're here today. And before we begin, I want to give a little bit of context as to who we are and what got us here. And so on this screen, you have three very, very different people. You have three individuals. Each of us grew up in different places, although Marty and Antonio, you're both from the same city, which is right there behind you, perfectly staged. It's a real landscape, by the way. Different generations, different economic circumstances, different different racial and cultural identities, which is important, right? But the three of us have a common goal of making our communities and our organizations a little bit more equitable, a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more welcoming, and helping other people do the same. So we also each have a really interesting backstory as to how we got here. So I'll start with myself, right? I'm a Latina woman who is in an executive role in a big corporate job in real estate. And through the events of 2020, between the pandemic and social and racial justice movements, my eyes really opened to the inequities that were all around me in my workplaces, in my communities, my neighborhoods. And I made the decision that some people call radical to completely leave my job and my career to focus full-time on changing this. Around the same time, Marty Mayer, who you have on the screen, a white male CEO, leader of a very successful company in New Orleans, also in real estate, was also confronting for the first time his own relationship with race and racial justice and equality, and asking himself, what can I do? What can I do? Can I do more? In response to the murder of George Floyd, Marty said, I have to do something. And he wrote an open letter where he shared his commitment to doing more, to learning, to trying to understand what role he could play. And he posted that letter online. That letter went a little bit viral and caught the attention of a local TV station in New Orleans, who approached Marty and said, Marty, we want you to sit down with Antonio Travis, who's the third person you see on your screen. And we want you to have a live conversation on TV to talk about race. And Antonio, who's here with us today, has been confronting and questioning these challenges about race from the time he was born, right? He is now, as you'll learn, a community organizer, a nonprofit leader, an educator, a friend, and he's very focused on building bridges between communities and between people who are very different. And so the three of us have been talking a lot over the past couple of months and asking each other the question of what holds people back from making change, right? Because we see, the three of us, so many capable, brilliant leaders who want to make a difference and who want to do more, but feel a bit at a loss and also feel a little bit uncomfortable about where to step and where to start. And so that's what we decided, exactly where we wanted to start. And so today we're not offering a set of DEI policies. We're not conducting an unconscious bias workshop, although those are all useful tools, right? What we're doing here is creating and providing a space for us to talk openly and honestly about the challenges we and other leaders face around this topic and share some ideas about how you can take your discomfort and turn it into action, right? And so we collect a lot of questions during the registration. There's some really, really good ones. We're also happy to take questions live, so please pop those into the Q&A, which is in the webinar. But before we dive in, and before we let Marty and Antonio talk, although you can speak it in a moment, you're not on mute, I want to share a really short 1.5 minute clip from the conversation between Marty and Antonio, which, as they told me right before we started, is actually almost to the day 2-year anniversary. So I'm going to pop this up on the screen. 2 year, there you go. And I'm going to share the screen with you now, and we'll watch this video.
Put you on the spot. Like, you got like, all right, you're an older white dude. Like, you know, you're older white dude. You don't have like
Old white dude.
old white dude, right? Right. You're a CEO of a company.
Yes, I am.
All right. What are those conversations like when you see people like George Floyd get killed, or you see some racial bomb explode? What's it like in your inner circle? What are we talking about?
You are putting me on the spot because it as a CEO of a company, it presents a different challenge for me because obviously, like in anything, there are friends of mine, longtime friends of mine, good friends of mine, and also people in my company don't share the views I share. And, you know, there's people in the company that have total different beliefs about social inequality or racial justice. And, you know, some of them said, do you think white people are racist? Do you think all white people are racist? I mean, one of them asked me that. And I said, no, I didn't say that all white people were racist. You know, that's not the point. I think the majority of white people are not overtly racist. I just think that they're unaware, or they're certainly not anti-racist.
All right, that is a short preview, short clip of a much longer conversation that is really worth watching after this webinar. So with that, Marty and Antonio, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Melina, for setting this up. I know, I appreciate you, Melina. You're the truth.
Well, I'm super excited. I know all three of us are excited, and we're going to dive right in. So we all agree, we're starting from this premise that there's a lot of discomfort around this topic. And so I want to dig into why, and I want to start with you, Marty, because I want to know how you felt walking into that conversation with Antonio. Antonio is someone who you hadn't met, who is very different from you, right? And you're going in to talk to him about a topic that at the time you yourself admitted you didn't really know much about. So talk us through how that felt.
It was scary, to be honest with you, because, you know, this whole area from originally even posting that thing on LinkedIn, that was a scary step. And it was like, what, you know, and then actually having a conversation with Antonio, you know, I didn't know if I would say the wrong thing. I didn't know what he would ask. I didn't know what kind of attitude he would have, you know, if he was going to be angry at me, or, you know, because, you know, from his perspective, although I did Google him, but, you know, I didn't also, you know, from my circle of friends and people that, you know, that I work with, it's like, well, why are you doing this? You know, why are you doing this? You know, and I didn't want it to seem, I didn't want it to seem, you know, like hokey or not genuine, you know, like I was doing it for the right reasons and not just some kind of, you know, some kind of political statement or something to be so politically correct. You know, in this day and age, everything's politicized. Some people say, oh, you're just doing it, you know, they call you names because you're doing it for social justice causes, and that wasn't the reason. Also, there's a lot of reasons I was scared walking into it, and I had no idea. And there was no script. You know, they didn't say, this is what you're going to talk about. They just said, y'all sit down, 3 cameras, and y'all start talking. And that was how it started. Yeah.
And so, Antonio, talk us through your thought process walking into that conversation. Were you totally comfortable?
No, I wasn't. I was kind of felt the same way Marty felt. I was uncomfortable for some of the same reasons. The folks and you know, folks were asking me the same questions. Why are you doing this? What do you gain from sitting down with Marty? And folks, you know, were questioning the authenticity of it. And I did too in the beginning. So I Googled Marty. I told Marty the first thing I told him when I met him. Like I looked you up, I Googled you. And if this didn't feel right, I wasn't doing this, right? But I showed up with an open heart, right? Like he said, I could have came angry and upset. And people actually chastised me for not going hard on Marty. But we wouldn't have got here, right? We wouldn't have got to a place where I could learn more about this guy and look past him being an old white man, right? And getting to know Marty, right? I think so for me, yeah, it was uncomfortable at first, but the more we sat down and talked and built, the more we were able. The tough questions it wasn't tough for us. We were able to talk through it. So, yeah.
And so, what was it over the course of that conversation that you both arrived a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit on guard? And so, what was it about your conversation or your interactions with each other that made it work, that made you connect rather than come apart or have conflict?
I think for me, a big part of the conversation was his kids. His kids, that told me a lot when he said, his son Scott, my brother, and his daughter, they were like, what you gonna do about it? Like, you got influence, dude. What are you doing? Like, it told me the type of guy he was without words being needed. Because if his kids are open enough to challenge him in a way, then he's fostering an environment where folks can grow. And so that helped disarm me with the conversation. And I'm like, I can't come at this dude crazy, man. It's things about him that I see already that I actually need to step back and be open and listen and hear him out. So that helped a lot for me. Well, I don't know what pieces,
Well, I think for me, what helped for me was Antonio, was told me about his background and in growing up in the school, which he didn't want to name the school, and he was just kind of used, and he went from one grade to another, even though he really shouldn't have gone to it, but he was used just so the school would get 100% rating. And so he kind of he felt used as growing up, but then he told me about the Black Man Rising and the mentorship program that he and his buddies started, in trying to help young Black men in their teens stay out of trouble. And at 2 years ago when we met, he was 27, right? Now that you're 29, you're gonna be almost 36,
right? Yeah.
But and I was thinking 27, and he is passionate about doing that to help others stay out of trouble, from because of his background. And I was comparing it to when I was 27, and what was I doing at 27? I was figuring out the best happy hour to go to, so I had a lot of respect for him, because this is where he and his buddies are devoting their time, is to help young people at his age. And so that's when I kind of felt, this guy's got something going on.
And I think what you're talking about is a level of openness, curiosity, and vulnerability, right? That you both came to that conversation. And that's, I think, a lesson that everyone should take from, how we interact, not just with people of different cultural and racial identities, but just around this topic in general. And the other thing that I really appreciate about your conversation, which you see a little bit in that clip, and which you see if you watch the whole thing, is that you're both leading with questions. You're not coming at each other with answers or arguments, or points or messages, right? You're really asking questions. And each time that Antonio, you would ask Marty a question, and sometimes Marty would say, I don't know, actually. And I think that is a really powerful thing, and possibly really an uncomfortable thing to do, especially on television.
Well, at the time, I actually felt saying I don't know was an easier thing to do than trying to come up with an answer that I had absolutely no answer to. And I think the question that one has to ask themselves, and I went into it kind of not with an agenda. I didn't have an agenda, to push some initiative. I didn't have some great, social justice project. This wasn't a DEI thing. I was going in there to talk to someone that had no idea anything about. And so I was there to listen more than speak. So I didn't go in prejudging anything or wanting to prove a point. So, as my son Scott actually told me, and I think it was a good example, he called it a Zen practice where you come in with a beginner's mind. If you come in with a beginner's mind and you're an open book, then you can learn more rather than come in with, having read something 14 to 15 times. And just by the nature of it, this was a beginner's mind because I had no clue. So really, Melina, it was a whole lot easier for me to say, I don't know, than to try to come up with an answer that I really had no clue to what the answer was.
Yeah, and Antonio, just out of curiosity, how did you receive the "I don't know" responses? Do you think it was a cop out, or how did you interpret that?
No, I think it was genuine. I think it was genuine. And that what it did for me was it showed me that the guy isn't here, like he said, to push some type of agenda. He has scripted answers. Like he could have easily, even without knowing, went in certain directions with his hand. Like he could have did a multitude of things that he didn't do. He was honest. He said, I don't know. And for me, that's just because we don't, we are all we're all experts in different fields, but we don't know everything. And I love that about him. I love the genuineness behind his outlook, because I don't know what it's like to be a CEO, right, of a real estate company. I can't pretend that I do. And so I appreciated that from him. So that was big for me.
Yeah, and I think this is such an important point because I confront this all the time with leaders at all different levels of this hesitation in the sphere to enter into this topic or conversations about this topic because they don't have the answer, or they haven't done a million workshops, or they haven't read a million books, right? And the reality is that all you need to start and really take that step is what we saw in that conversation, which is that openness, that curiosity, have the questions, and be honest when you don't have an answer, and ask, how would you respond to that? So that said, there are ways to make leaning into, an uncomfortable conversation or topic a little bit more comfortable. And one of the frameworks, I think that's been really helpful and useful to me that I've learned from you, Antonio, is this idea of restorative practices. Right. And I think it's a really great learning tool and tool that leaders can apply that helps ease this discomfort. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that is and how it helps people navigate these conversations?
Yeah, it's like restorative practices. It's like a social science to build relationships, right? To build social networks. It's basically tools you can use to connect with people. It's that simple. And when you come from that framework, when you come from that angle, these conversations become way easier when you approach it that way, right? When you approach a person and you're seeking to build from them, which means you're acknowledging that you don't know things, right? We don't know. I can assume, I can prejudge from looking at you, but it just takes a level of awareness to be able to engage in that type of way. And it's hard and it's fruitful work because you learn things that you may have prejudged, thought you knew, and it actually helps you grow better, right? Not the easiest thing to do. You do have to be vulnerable to do it, but it's very fruitful. I do it with kids every day who have conflict, right? Kids breaking into cars, kids who are doing things. We community build. Community building circles is a tool that you use, right? Where these kids get to open up about their trauma, their past, and you just connect the dots. And so if these kids who are in conflict, who are very impulsive, are able to connect the dots and see why I'm putting on door handles, I think we can do it too, right? I don't think it's hard for us, but you have to be open. You have to be vulnerable. If you're not, then it won't work. So it's like it's a you thing.
I can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think that, like about 6 or 8 months ago, Antonio invited me to, well, I mean, it's been several times to his school where he works, but he invited me to the circle for his restorative practice, this circle with his young men, probably 15, 16, 17 years old, that he's talked about. And so I got to first witness kind of what he was talking about. And he told me at the time that he said that I would be the first white person in the circle. In that, and he told them, but he's been talking about me, and so they were open to meet me because of him. I couldn't have gone in there on my own and done it, but they were open to meet because he vouched for me and they trust Antonio. And I've seen what Antonio's influence on them can do. And so I sat in a circle, and they had the rules, and he went through the rules and of the circle and respect and honesty and all this stuff. And then they got to ask me, he basically said anything. They asked any question, no question was off the table, which again was quite intimidating because I had no idea what they were going to ask me. They started with, you're a CEO. What does a CEO do? What do you study to become a CEO? What do your kids do? Do you invest in crypto? What do you think of gun violence? They were, what is a CEO? What's your salary? I basically said, well, what do you think it is? And one says, oh, I think it's like $82,000. But it was an eye-opening to me, just because they asked questions, and then I asked Antonio afterwards, what did they think about it? Because I could see then what he's doing for them, and that was very impressive.
Yeah, and I applaud, another example of someone's willingness to move forward with discomfort, right? And open to that. And I think this idea of restorative practices where your intention, or the focus is your intention, which is to understand and build a bridge, is really useful in a couple examples. I deal a lot recently with leaders in pretty senior positions who've said, okay, I have a conflict within my organization where someone has accused me of saying or doing something offensive or racist. And there's a real discomfort in approaching that, because A, I'm not racist, and then B, I didn't say anything wrong and my intentions were all good, right? And so 9.9 times out of 10, that leader enters into the conversation or the situation sort of feeling like they need to prove their intention and their values and sort of defend that. But with the restorative practices model, you're entering into that conversation not from that angle, but from an angle of, I really want to understand how this person interpreted what I did or said. I really want to understand the disconnect here, because I see this and this person sees this. And when you enter into these kinds of conflicts with that approach, again, the intention, as Antonio and Marty have been talking about, it actually takes a lot of the pressure off of being right. And so I think it's a really beautiful framework that we can use to make uncomfortable situations actually community building.
Yep.
So we're going to jump into the first audience question, which is pretty uncomfortable. And so that question is, and I love it, why do we have to talk about race all the time? And I get this question sometimes, right, where there's a sense that in talking about it so much and making everything about race, we're actually making it a bigger problem than it is. I'm sure we've all gotten this question before. So Marty, let me start with you. Why do we have to talk about race all the time?
Melina, I've actually gotten that question since this whole journey for me started 2 years ago now. Uncomfortable at the time. I've gotten that question from some people. Why are we talking about race all the time? Years ago, we didn't talk about race so much. It wasn't as big of an issue as it is now. And, probably 2 years ago, I would have never known how to answer that question. And I don't know that I know how to answer it now, other than I know one answer. The answer I give is, maybe it wasn't an issue for you.
Right.
And it wasn't an issue for me because I didn't live it every day. I'm an old white man, as Antonio says, but I didn't live the race issue every day, or experience. I didn't grow up like he grew up, and but for those people who do live it every day, it is an issue. And just because we don't talk about it, it's like anything. If you don't talk about something, a problem, then, and you don't acknowledge that it exists, then can you ever change it? And I think one thing I've learned now is, at least from this conversation and talking about it, and again, just spending time with his kids and his young men and talking in groups, maybe you can make a difference, just by talking about it, honestly.
I love that, because there's almost a sense of, if we don't talk about it, if we avoid it, then it's not really a problem, right? And that's not actually how it works. So, Antonio, what would you say to that question of why do we have to talk about race at all?
Yeah, and then for just to shout him out, when he sat in a circle with those guys, they asked him loaded questions intentionally to see if he would dismiss, those type of conversations. They asked him questions about race and gun violence on purpose to see where his head was, to see, oh, can we really trust you? Can we really talk to you about it? Are you going to dismiss it? And his answer was genuine. But the thing with race, and this is surface level right here, we don't have time to go in too deep. We know it's a social construct. We know race was created by man. But what I would say, what I think about that is just, you can't not acknowledge our differences. We are different. He's short. I'm tall, right? I can reach the top of the refrigerator. He can't. That don't make him a bad person, right? It just, so it's just this thing with, it's uncomfortable. I understand, but we're different, and we have different cultures and different backgrounds. And if you want an environment that's for all, you acknowledge those things. You don't run away from them. It actually helps you build a healthier work environment, right? So I just think that when I hear the question, what I hear is a person who may have been able to avoid that, right? And avoiding it, like Marty said, avoiding the issue we can't do anything about it if we won't acknowledge it, right? And so that's the first step I tell young men. We can't talk about the trauma or the issue if you won't even acknowledge what it is. We can't take any steps further. So it just really comes down to our differences and us being okay with being different. We're different.
I love that. And I've noticed this a lot with the leaders I work with, where there's this almost like automatic discomfort about difference. And so we seek almost, again, on autopilot to try and find the points that we have in common. We're almost desperate to say, oh, you're wearing a white shirt, I'm wearing a white shirt, we have something in common. It's like, well, actually, being curious about differences and celebrating them can be, again, another way to connect, just as you say. And we got this really great question from someone early on, which I really appreciated, was this idea of when people say, well, I don't see color, I don't see race. And that's actually counterproductive, because, well, first of all, of course you do. Right? There are a few cases where you don't, but in most cases you do. And second, it's not a bad thing if you do, right? As you're saying, Antonio. So don't run away from differences, I think is a really important point. But then we also got this question that's sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, and we got this in yesterday, I think. But I thought it was really interesting around, well, when is it okay and appropriate to ask someone about their cultural identity or race when you're getting to know them? Sometimes, is it too soon, or is it too invasive? When is that okay?
That's a case by case. Like, that's completely up to the folks who are building with each other. They dictate and determine when that conversation is okay. As long as you have consent in that conversation, you can have that conversation when you first meet and shake hands. If both parties say, like, let's do it, like, that's completely up to the folks. And I'll tell you, people actually appreciate when you take interest into their different backgrounds and stuff like that. It's actually like a real powerful thing. I do it a lot. I often like to ask those type of questions when I meet people to get to know them better. So it's completely up to them, you know, but consent is like,
Yeah.
I think the thing, yeah.
That's a good point. You know, I used to get the question and I didn't get it very often, which made me think that maybe people were sort of avoiding offending me or the topic, but I love it when people go, hey, your last name sounds a little foreign. It sounds kind of Spanish. You know, where are you from? And I get to say, oh, actually, it's Puerto Rican. My father is from the island, you know, and I love having that conversation with people. But it actually surprises me how infrequently people ask me that, especially in professional settings. Because for me, it's not taboo. It's something I celebrate, something we can celebrate together. But I want to go on to the next question, which we got a lot of questions about this topic, which is this concept of allyship. And what is true allyship? What is being a white ally? How can white people and leaders be effective allies for our friends and our colleagues of color? So Antonio, I want to start with you on that because you've done so much work around this. You know, what is true allyship?
It just goes back to the last question. Is if you're moving through it restoratively, you have an understanding about the needs. Like if you talk about white allyship, then you understand that like the relationship would kind of shine a light on what the needs are and how you can support that person, right? And so, like for Marty, it's not about writing checks, doing that type of stuff. It's about showing up for me in spaces that I'm not in, right? I value anything in any way he show up for me, but because of our relationship and him knowing me and what I do, he understands that he's in rooms that I'm not in, and his voice is my voice, right? He's speaking like, and so it shows up in an authentic way, and it shows up in a way most fruitful for the relationship and building and moving forward. And like I said, it really like depends on the context of the relationship with folks and how they're moving forward and how and what it looks like. But it's different. And like I said, he shows up. He's been showing up for me a lot in different spaces and in circles that I'm not in, right? And I think that's
So
the relationship.
yeah, so it's focused on relationship as opposed to sort of transactional things like you've been
Right.
talking about. And so, Marty, you know, Antonio just said you're an ally. A lot of people would consider you a pretty effective, you know, good ally. How do you view that as an ally? And, you know, were you always that?
No, I mean, probably 2 years ago, I would have not even known what you meant by being an ally. You know, that was, I was sympathetic to, maybe sympathetic to, the cause, but it was like I'm sitting back watching it from, like a movie. Like it really wasn't affecting me. It was just kind of, but I mean, I had no idea what it was to be an ally. And, and as I've said that, I didn't feel like, well, what is one person can do anything anyway? I mean, that's when my kids were saying, Dad, you need to do something. It's like, well, what can one person do anyway? You can't make a difference. I think now I understand, and this is something, Antonio, I think has taught me in many ways, and because I've seen what he's, his circle of friends, and what he's had to deal with on his end, and like with his group saying, getting on him because he wasn't angry enough at me, and he's impacting them, and now I think that there are situations that come up when he says he's not in the room and I am, there are things that now come into my mind. I think I understand better what Antonio is dealing with now than 2 years ago. I would have never understood what he was dealing with certain situations, and I probably may have judged wrongly about how what worked, but now I can understand better. Okay, I get it now. And so I think that's just what I've learned in the last 2 years.
I agree. And I think what you're both saying is that the real root of allyship isn't necessarily in your performance or the things you do or the policies you implement, but it's really, this ongoing commitment to understanding other perspectives and growing with it. Antonio, you are in this every day. This is now my full-time job, and all of us are still every day learning and trying to ask people their perspectives and their experiences and how did you experience this? I thought it was useful. What did you think? Right. And that's what true allyship is. And I think sometimes people are looking for a sort of a list of actions to take, right? And it's an intention. And then the actions follow actually relatively easily when you're super clear on understanding, and that being the intention is understanding more. Along the lines of this topic, we got this great question, a couple of great questions about, allyship and how do you support and be an ally without coming across as ticking boxes, right? Which Marty did pretty effectively, but then also without coming across as a white savior, which is a challenge that a lot of people face. So I want to do good, but I don't want to come across as disingenuous. Marty, just like what you said. So Antonio, I think a lot of people would be curious to hear from you, how you tell the difference between someone who's just ticking boxes and someone who's really in it with you.
Right. I mean, it really, like you said, moving with intent. So it's just certain things are aligned with you. You can tell, especially I guess in my position because of the work that I do. You just kind of know when a person is moving authentically and they're genuinely trying to move in a way to support and grow and understand. And you can tell when somebody's trying to check boxes. Like it's a way, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain because it has so much to do with that person. But you just move a certain way. You ask certain questions. You acknowledge that you don't know. You just move with a certain intent to help be an ally versus someone who like you said, it's like an action, like it's like an item, like, oh, well, yeah, I just it's just different. It's just different practices and everything across the board when you're dealing with folks. And I run into a lot of folks like that, and I kind of got used to it. But when you run into the genuine people, it's just that, again, like the whole conversation is different. You just
and
tell.
I think what's great about that, right, is more of this, you feel his intention, or you feel someone's intention. And Marty can say a wrong word, or he can say something that you're like, Marty, that you don't say it that way, right? He can do that, and he probably has, but it doesn't impact negatively your relationship, because you know that fundamentally, what his intention is, and that he's learning and he's committed to growing. And so you go, haha, Marty, like, you don't say it like that, you say it like this, and let me explain to you why. And he goes, I didn't know that, thank you, right? And that is the beauty of that true allyship approach, right? Because I have so many leaders that are always like, well, I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. And it's like, when you can get clear on your intention again, and just be honest about what you do and don't know, you can say the wrong thing and you're not going to get thrown out a window, right? Like you're not going to get canceled. You're not, it's about establishing the kinds of relationships like you see here between us, where we can say a word or say the wrong thing and it's okay. So I think that's really important.
I'm pretty good at saying the wrong thing, Lena.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
I said I'm pretty good at saying the wrong thing.
There you go. And also I want to make the point, because I talk about this a lot, that this idea of having the right terminology and terms, right? It's kind of exhausting. And it's really important to know that that's not what's important. I mean, there are certain things obviously that are always going to be offensive and you should not say them. But in the beginning of the call, I said I refer to myself as Latina. And there are some people who would take offense to that and say, no, it should be Latinx. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of context behind these different terms, and also the terms change over time, and what's considered okay or not okay can vary person to person. So don't attach yourselves to the exact terminology. Attach yourselves to wanting to understand, how those terms or the things you say impact the person you are relating with. So I want to move on to one of our last big questions, which is super uncomfortable. And it's these, we've got a couple questions on this concept of white privilege.
Right.
Now, on the one hand, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, where someone says, look, it feels insulting. How can you say that I'm privileged? You know, you don't know how hard I've worked. You don't know the struggles I've had, the obstacles. And on the other hand, we got questions saying, why is it so hard for people to understand their own privilege? So I want to know for each of you what that term means to you, how it lands with you, and how you would respond to that. Who wants to start? I'll let you guys choose.
I'll start because when Antonio and I had the first conversation, he kind of asked me a question along those lines about, you know, was it easier for white kids or something, or more challenge? I forget how you put it, but it was along those lines. And, you know, my answer then is, you know, privilege is not solely based upon, it's not a race, you know, thing or not a race thing. I mean, because you can certainly have white people that are born not to privilege. I mean, you can have white people that are born to extreme poverty. You can have white people born to, you know, abusive parents. You can have, you know, I mean, in this day and age, I mean, one of white people who are Jewish that are, you know, being persecuted because of their faith. You know, so it's not strictly, but, you know, I do think that the racial issue adds another challenge that white people don't have, just because, you know, it's the first thing people say. You know, I say, oh, Antonio's black. So I do think it's not to the sole gauge of privilege, you know, but I think that it is an additional obstacle that, you know, white people don't generally have to deal with.
Yeah, and I always, and I like how you said it, Melina. When white people hear folks say white privilege, they get to, like, sometimes they get offensive, right? Because of, like, I don't, again, saying that your privilege is not saying that you did not have to overcome obstacles, that you did not have to, like, earn your spot, right? Like, that you didn't have to work just as hard as everybody else. It's not necessarily saying that, but we have to acknowledge, we just, you know, again, our differences. We just have to acknowledge that race is a social construct, and we built the system based on it, right? And so if we just look at the factuals of it, my grandparents couldn't get bank loans at a certain time, right? Like, they didn't have access to certain resources because of their race. And so when we say white privilege, we just say some obstacles that we have faced throughout time in history, you didn't have to worry about if you went that route, right? It's not to negate your humanity or your experiences as a person. And I think that's what sometimes that's what white people get hung up on, like, oh, you just dismissing my reality, saying that I'm privileged, and I had to, you know, like, you know, some examples Marty gave, and that's not what it is. I'm a straight male. I'll use this example. I'm heterosexual. I don't have to walk in a room and say I'm straight. I don't have to worry about saying pronouns and all that stuff, right? But there are people who identify differently who have to worry about those things, right? And so just challenging the status quo and stuff like that. It's tough. Again, it's hard. It's hard work, but it's just like, you know, you entitled to your space the same way I'm entitled to mine, but we're just talking about, like, this piece of it and how, you know, it has played a factor into something. So I really want white people to understand, like, nah, your reality is your reality, brother. Like, you, sister, you know, you earned it. You got it.
I think it's so well said. And, you know, what I see a lot of times with our reactions to this concept of white privilege, very loaded terms too, is this black and white thinking, right? You're either privileged or you're not. You're either lucky or you're not. You know, you either have it easy or you have it hard. And it's not that way. You know, each one of us, I mean, if you look at the three of us, each of us has different privileges and advantages, and it depends on the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on the circumstances and the situation and the context. So acknowledging, you know, it's not having privileges or not having privileges that's the issue here. I think it's just being able to be open and honest with, you know, where you have advantages in different situations, where other people that you share those situations with have challenges or obstacles? And then what do you do with those differences? And that really comes down to this question of equity, right? If I can recognize, Marty, in certain spheres, you have advantages because of your race or your seniority, right? And maybe Antonio or I don't have those, that you can be in that space and advocate for us and try and level that gap, right? So privilege isn't always bad either. It's what you do with that makes a difference. So we got a couple questions live, in addition to the ones that we weren't able to answer today from the registration, and we are going to make an effort to answer those after. But we are getting very close to time. And so what I want to do is ask one last very uncomfortable question for you two, and I'll pose it to myself as well. And that is, everyone's listened in, they've hopefully learned some things, they've understood a bit more, but this is also about taking action, right? So the question is, what next? Simple, but difficult. So can each of you give the audience a prompt, a challenge, a what's next? What can they do next with this information to move forward? Marty, let's start with you.
Well, what I would say to do next is based upon my own journey in this, because I did not do this for any reasons. I did not have any overarching plan to create any difference, to do anything, because I didn't feel like one person, like I said, I didn't feel like one person could make a difference. What could I do? And then, one thing led to another, led to meeting Antonio, which has led to a lot of other things, which if over the last 2 years that have happened, that have been totally unexpected. And so and that all started from, posting something on social media. So my thing is, what's next is do something. You can do something. One person can do something. And if you don't know what to do, like I had no idea what to do, then, you can reach out to any of us and you start a conversation with someone, because you never know where that conversation may lead.
Love that.
Yeah. And I would say take it back to your inner circles. Take it back to your inner circles. That's the first place you can start. Take how you feel. First, process what you're feeling right now. It's all right. Whatever emotions you're feeling right now is cool. It's fine. Process it. And then from there, take what you feel back to your inner circles. It was important for me to sit him in circles with young Black men who live in the inner city of New Orleans, right? So they can rub shoulders with him. It's important. And him doing that made a difference in their lives. So now when they walk down the street and they see people who look like him, they don't come with the same judgments and preconceived notions that I had when I seen people like him. It makes a difference. Trust me. You like he said, one person can make a difference. So please, take this to your inner circle, but build off of it. Build off of it. Email us. Like I said, I'm more than happy to come sit in any one of y'all offices, and we can go deeper. We can build it out. But my challenge is to build on it. Like, take what you feel right now and just go one step further. And it looks whatever it looks like for you, then I encourage you to do it.
I love that idea, just one step at a time, which you both
And I would just add, Melina, too, what he said. And I've seen it where when I've gone to meet his young men, and they've come to some of them have come to my office, and he says, just the fact that you've spent time doing that with them exposes them to something they had no idea. It's a whole new world. It changes the way, from, like he said, from what he thought of people to what it changes their perspective in many ways. And to me, at first, it seems such a little thing to do. It's some little thing. It's not writing a check. I mean, writing a check's fine, but it's not writing a check and then it's spending time doing something, because little things can make a difference in just of yourself. And so that's where I think if I just can spend time with these young men, and that can make a difference in their future, then, that's well worth the time. I mean, what better way can you spend your time?
Absolutely. And I would, my response to this question is very along the same lines then I would challenge each of you to focus on this concept of understanding someone else's perspective and go have a conversation with someone who is very different from you. Age, gender, sexual orientation, race, cultural identity. Take them out to lunch, go have a coffee, do something where you share each other's perspective and you try and understand a little bit how their experience in the same space that you're in could be different. And I can almost guarantee you that that is going to lead you to a very obvious next step. And it's going to be pretty powerful. So with that, what I want to do is share this screen with our contact information. In addition, all three of us as a Now What Next Step would love to make ourselves available to you, either all together, or if there's one of us that you really want to dig in with, please reach out to us. We're here. We would like to hold more of these. So the other thing that we're going to ask of you is to fill out the survey that will pop up on your screen, and you'll get in an email specifically about this and this topic and what you want to hear more about. And we are also going to reach out in the next few days with the recording so you can share it around, so you can rewatch parts that you want. And contact us, please. And one other thing that we'd like to do is give a special thank you to 3 people without whom this would not have been possible, and their contributions and perspectives on this topic were so useful for us. So Donna, Scott, and Ross, thank you so much. And the final thing I'm going to leave everyone with, that we're going to leave everyone with, is this quote that really resonated with all of us. Which is from Martin Luther King Jr. It's the ultimate measure of a man, or whatever gender you are, is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. So with that, I hope everybody feels a little bit more comfortable getting uncomfortable, and we look forward to doing this again and helping everyone lean in a little bit more to this topic. And we look forward to talking to you soon. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Marty and Antonio, and have a great rest of the year.
Bye, Melina. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Wakanda, everybody, Wakanda.